Much.
Okay, thank you. And hello, everybody. I've stopped saying good morning because that's often the
Wrong
wrong
time.
time of day for a lot of people. So hello, and it's very it's very lovely to be with you. So I'm just going to go on to slideshow now. And we'll take a look at Unit 8 today. So Unit 8 is really all about observation and assessment. And this really is, from an assessor's point of view, this is really where you come into your own in lots of ways. And so you understand the observation cycle perhaps better than anyone else will ever understand it. So it's about making sure we embed those skills, those principles, those qualities into individuals that we're working with. So there's the staff and the students to make sure that they understand the importance of observation. So just to set the scene, we are looking at, as I say, the assessment of children's learning and development. And we'll talk through that unit within the qualification and try and make some links. I know that previously we had a session that linked the child development, for example, with Unit 8, and that's so important. So this puts us in the zone, but I know you're all very familiar with the qualification now as it stands. And that Unit 2 there, holistic child development, so important when it comes to Unit 8. And we did talk about holistic benefits between Unit 2 and Unit 8 when we went through Unit 2. But you can't really do one without the other. And that's why, in a way, observation, I know you don't have to teach in the order of these units, absolutely not. You can mix and match and do lots of wild and wonderful things with the content and the structure. However, you do need to have a really sound, or your students need to have a really sound understanding of children's development to be able to really effectively observe and plan and assess. Okay, so here we go. Let's take a look at this particular unit. Now, the first thing you'll notice there, it is one of the larger units. So we've got 85 guided learning hours on here, but that's 50 hours of work placement. So there, again, it's telling you straight away that this is something that requires the learner to apply knowledge in their practical placements or indeed in their place of work. And that's really important, that actually we're going to be, the majority of this is going to be assessed through actual application of that knowledge. So expecting a student to be able to do this in the very early days might be something that needs to be done over and over and practiced. And we'll talk about that, especially when we come to Learning Outcomes 7. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a walk through the unit itself. So understand the role of assessment in helping parents, carers and educators recognise children's progress. So when we think of observation, we sometimes detach it from that cycle. So one of the first things to do is actually, well, if I was doing this unit, then one of the first things I'd do is do a little bit of a recap on Unit 2. I'd think about child development, or when I was doing child development, I would weave in aspects of Unit 8. So I'd see those two things as being very much joined, and certainly by a thread, if nothing else, so that you're referring back or referring to those two units and keep those in your mind. It doesn't matter if the students have all finished Unit 2 and they're now starting Unit 8, but you could do some recapping and think about what those expectations are, what the factors are that might sort of influence and impact how children develop, and then looking at how you find out more about the children that you're working with by simply observing, and that's okay. So this particular outcome is reminding us about what the assessment cycle is. So you could refer to the early years foundation stage. You could look at the assessment cycle, the importance of what that cycle is telling us about observing, about planning, about assessing, and about how that really is a continual loop. And being able to express and explain what that means is really important. So how that shapes teaching and learning so that children develop the broad range of skills, knowledge and attitudes they need as foundations for future progress. So it's important that we have those check-ins, and the early years foundation stage is telling us you don't need to be bogged down with lots and lots of paperwork. We want our practitioners in the nursery environment, working with the children down on their level, really extending play and learning. Absolutely, of course we do. But that doesn't take away the importance of that judgment that's being made, that sort of ongoing insight into what the children are doing. It's not that you're abandoning the power of observation. To me, it's the exact opposite. It's you can't rely on the pen and paper now. You're watching those children, you're getting to know those children. Your knowledge of child development is absolutely critical to be able to recognise and notice. You're not necessarily going away with a lot of paperwork and reflecting as a practitioner on, oh, didn't meet that outcome, not sure about that one. This is something that's being done because you're applying that knowledge. It's a given. So I think it can be quite harder. We need to think about that. It's a skill, and that skill needs to be learned. So we might start off by thinking about what is formative assessment and really honing in on that cycle and talking about how they may have seen that cycle in their placements or in their place of work. What happens? How do those individual members of staff, how do members of staff plan to meet the needs of children? And they might plan in the moment, they might plan quite broadly and then adapt those plans in the moment, which is quite typical. How does it work, and how are they using what they know about the children to be able to do that? So really getting these students or members of staff to think about how this process works in practice. And that then will help with 1.2, that relationship between formative assessment and the learning and development process. Because we might be thinking, oh, winter's coming and we're going to do this, and these are the things that we'll put out, and that's lovely and that's wonderful and it's all very topical, but how is that going to support the needs of the child? So sometimes, and it's quite incidental, and we certainly don't do it on purpose, but sometimes we start with an idea rather than starting with the child. And so it's important to start with the child and build things around that. And that might well fit in to themes or topics depending on how that individual setting plans or approaches planning. So identify ways early years educators assess the development of babies and children. What's happening within your setting? This is all very much around that knowledge still. So we're exploring that cycle. We're really spending time to think about what happens, what do they do? Does that relate to anything in the early years foundation stage or development matters? Do they use the check-in points of development matters? How are they applying their knowledge of child development? If they're not writing copious notes, how on earth do they know where that child is at? What's the skill that's being applied? So having those really rich conversations and really sort of drumming home that sincere knowledge of child development is crucial. And it really is the core of everything that they would do. Knowing their children extremely well and knowing child development really well will give them the skills they need to be able to follow this observation and assessment cycle as we know. And then summarising the benefits of assessment for parents, carers, and for our colleagues, for other educators. And that's so important as well. Parents really do want to know everything about what's going on in their child's day. That's lovely, and that's a one way of engaging. And without records that are formulated, it's difficult sometimes. So there will be notes that are made, there'll be records that are kept, and so on. But having that dialogue and being able to share information around your knowledge of child development and how that's been applied to individual children is critical to how the observation and assessment cycle work. So we are not just thinking about what has that child done in isolation and how does that meet this set of outcomes. We're not being target driven, we're being child driven. So we're looking at that child and thinking, where are they? What can they do? How can I extend their play and learning? Is that child enjoying what they're doing? So it's applying all of that knowledge and skill without having all the bureaucracy, if you like, that surrounds it. And that's what the EYFS was trying to do right from the beginning, I feel. But then that was sort of if you like, developed into wonderful journals and things that I'm sure parents and carers and educators loved. But what it was doing in some cases was taking staff away to be able to create these lovely journals. And actually, the child is then not having that high quality interaction that they need, and that was delaying the process of child development. So it was quite ironic, really. Okay, so in learning outcome 2, we're understanding that there are different assessment methods and techniques which inform what we know about children's progress and the planning cycle. 2.1 is always an interesting one for me. And so I'm just going to dwell on it for a little moment, because identify different assessment methods and techniques and how they are used to inform early years educators of next steps for babies and children. And the rest of that will kind of follow on and really does apply itself to the first learning outcome and can be taught together. But 2.1 you might want to do separately, because 2.1 is really looking at all those different traditional and contemporary methods. Now, if we've had any, and me personally, you know, I've had many a constructive discussion around 2.1 or around the content of that particular criterion. So we all know, and I've just said it myself, we're in the EYFS, we're going away from that paperwork. We might be making the odd note here and there because that's going to help us with our record keeping, but we're not making copious long observations. And the reason that we're not doing that is because we're experienced and we're knowledgeable, and we've got that knowledge of the child and the knowledge of child development. And as a professional, that's the skill that we're using to make that connection and to bring that together and make those day-to-day observations and recognize when something is absolutely wonderful and when something is just not quite right. So that's really important. So why do we insist in CASH, in NCFE, why do we insist that the students are looking at all these different methods, or at least identifying them? And the reason for that is that whilst you're on a training program, that is when you're absolutely making that connection between child development and the children that you're working with. And that's a skill that needs to be refined. It is one of the most important skills in the job of an early years educator. It always was, and I think it always will be, because it will help you if you take the time, if your students take the time to do those more traditional methods, the narrative, for example. And yes, okay, there's going to be things that they might miss along the way, but they're training. They're in that capacity to learn how to make those connections, and giving the student the time to be able to do that and to explore those other methods, as well as blossoming into being able to use the more contemporary methods that are used within their setting today, then that road and that pathway becomes something that becomes more refined. But what I'm afraid of, and this is probably, it might just be me, but there might be other people out there as well that think this. Certainly for me, I think back in, too long ago to remember, but back in the day, we used to do lots of observations, many observations, and those observations at first really helped, because I think we did too many, and really helped to bring that connection between child development and the children that we were looking at, because it forced us to stop within what could be quite a chaotic environment and to observe and to really tune in to the children or individual child. Then after a little while, that sort of plateaued, because I think we did, you know, too many, as I say, but it was enough to be able to say, I really get now why I'm observing, and I understand the connections that I'm trying to make, and I can make those now without writing all of that. I can just recognize aspects of that and those particular sufficient moments. Now, I don't think I'd have been able to recognize those significant moments if I hadn't have gone through that journey. So it's something, you know, that I strongly believe in, that why are we training if we can do it anyway? We need to train because we need to apply that skill. That's what the training is for. So being able to identify and to be able to practice. I would really encourage students to be, and members of staff, to be practicing some of those longer observations. You know, people will say, and you may think this, and you know, it's not wrong to think this, but oh, we don't do it like that now. No, but you're still doing that. You're still making that connection between child development that individual child when you're making those judgments from the observations that you're seeing, and that skill is something that happens, I think, and blossoms over time. So do give students opportunity to practice observations, and that's why I would say linking this with Unit 2 and something you might do at the beginning of the programme is really important. So you might not make those final assessments on Unit 8 until the student is ready and until they're refined in their observational skills and you feel happy that they're making that connection. However, they need to practice. So likewise, I wouldn't leave the actual practicing of what do we mean by observation until the very end. It is something that students could do, or members of staff could do all the way through. They'll see it happening all the time, but they'll see those short, snappy type observations and what the placement needs to know and what the student needs to appreciate is that actually I'm training, I'm on a journey to be able to do it like you. I'm not there yet. And I think to me, I'm labouring the point, I know, but to me, that's really, really important. So the rest of those outcomes, I think, absolutely make sense as they are. We're thinking about how, when and why to conduct the observation, assessment and planning cycle. So there may be specific times or individual children where we're asked to really focus in on a particular area of learning or development, and that might be because it's been a recognised area for intervention and you want to find out more. So that is one reason why we might do that. And actually we might also, and we are all the time being observant of our children, and 100% when we are with the children, we are observing the whole time. It doesn't mean we're there with a pen and paper, it just means we're watching and we're tuning in and we're seeing where things could be extended or where things need to be, where you need to perhaps intervene. They're all observations. So explain any benefits as well as limitations to formative assessment, including observation records. So if you do have students having a go with some of these different observation methods, then you can think about when they might be useful, how they might be useful, and sort of especially in relation to 2.2 as well, but remembering that connection is so important between child development and what you're doing. We're not just observing blind, if you like, we're observing because we want to make that connection. So we need to appreciate that. And then using the EYFS and development matters and so on, and birth to 5, which I think is going through a revision, but not quite there yet. But so those documents are really helpful in, especially in the early days, in helping students to make that connection. Okay, so understand the role of the early years educator for effective and accurate proportionate assessment. So what on earth does that mean? So explaining the significance of accurate and coherent records. So that's important, isn't it? We need, when you're doing those short, snappy observations that might not make much sense to somebody else reading them, we've got to make sure that they would make sense. What does that actually mean? Let's think about how we might assess that. Let's think about making sure we've got next steps in that clearly brings together what you've seen with what you're going to do next and why. And then the importance of conducting proportionate assessment as part of daily practice. And that just means that again, as part of the EYFS, we're not taking our time away from the children. That's when we observe. So we're not making these wonderful, pretty journals at the expense of the time we could be with the children. That's what we are. We're child professionals. We're childcare professionals. That's what we do. And so prioritising those high quality interactions with babies and children is the only time that you can do observations. But I think just emphasizing the fact that when we're with our babies and children, we are observing and making assessment judgments absolutely every minute of every hour that we're with them, because we might decide, oh, okay, I'm going to pick Janet up. I'm just going to show her outside because she seems to be straining to see her mum who's leaving the nursery. You do it. So you've observed, you've assessed, and you've done next step. All of those things are observation and can be used to be able to show students this is what you do all the time. But sometimes we do that with perhaps for greater emphasis, or to be able to think about experiences and activities within the nursery environment that might support and extend the next steps in that child's development. So we respond all the time, and the way that we respond is more than likely, because I can't see how you detach it from something you've seen, from an observation, to children who are not able to sort their own conflict out. You've observed it, you've assessed it, and you do the next step. And likewise, in everything that you do when you're thinking about sustained shared thinking, when you're having conversations with children, these are all the results of that proportionate assessment and that observation of children. So we sometimes plan for greater intervention and for greater awareness of next steps and developmental or learning areas, but we also observe all the time and we assess all the time. So again, it's understanding that and seeing that everyday interaction as part of this observation cycle, again, is something that sometimes we don't always appreciate with our students. And then we do need to look at those key stages in assessment where milestones are kicking in and where we are expected to make those professional judgments. So we're looking at the progress check at the age of 2. Who does that? And it might be something that takes place in the nursery environment. Sometimes it's the health visitor who does that. But what's all that about, and what are we looking for, and why? And then looking at reception baseline, so that sort of assessment that's taking place within the first 6 weeks of a child starting their school environment, and how the early years foundation stage, the profile, the EYFS profile, how that is used in terms of those early learning goals at the end of reception. We are explaining, and that's just know what they are and what's involved in them, who might take those, and what are we looking for. So really just having examples of those to share and think about, and maybe that can open up discussions, bringing in any experiences that they may have of children of these age ranges. And if not, then we're looking at that from a knowledge base, because it is an understand. We're then explaining the value each key stage of assessment has. So when you're doing 4.1, your discussions certainly can be around all of these different key stakeholders for planning the next steps. And the key stakeholders here are going to be the parents, the carers, your other colleagues that you might be working with, that might be other professionals as well, and of course the children. The children themselves, and building around their interests. So that really does tie in and give the opportunity for that sort of cohesion between what's going on in the theoretical and what are we seeing in our placements or places of work. And the whole unit, should really be treated as something where you can bring examples where you can from your practical experience. So we've talked about this, and I think I'll come back to number 5. I'll remember I'm on number 5, but I just want to go to number 7. because this really is something that can't be left to the end if we're going to allow that time to wallow and blossom with the observation cycle, and to be able to really refine those skills. So by the end of the training, we are ready to adapt and adopt the way that observations are done within that setting. We're ready, we've made those connections. We're not leaping and leaving a gap in our own knowledge and our own skill, which would be unfair for that individual. Their training, they need to be able to have that time. And I think, so looking at learning outcome 7 really does say, right, we know now about the cycle. We know why we observe. We know how we observe. We've had a look at the different methods. Now let's try some out. And again, you might do more than 10. It says a minimum of 10 observations. You might do more of those, or you might try different methods out in different situations as part of practice before you even get to learning outcome 7. So, and then you're actually ready to assess them formally, if you like, and say, okay, we've got all of these now that actually show an increasing awareness, an increasing confidence in that cycle. So don't be afraid to ask students to do more than 10, or to really explore different methods as part of 2.1 and so on, and use them. And then as you feel they've refined it and they've got observations off to a T, and they really do understand this process, then you're looking at these 10 observations in line with the settings with the own setting procedures. Now, that's why I really do encourage students to go on that journey and to really explore at least narrative observations, where you're sitting and where you're recording and you're able to think about what you've seen in connection to child development, and then that unique child in the next planning, for next steps planning. Because I think if we miss that step and we go straight to this, where those skills have been refined by staff in the setting, then we are doing a disservice to the student and to the children themselves. So it's very, very important that we look at that in line with own setting procedures, and they might not be anything like the narrative observations of the past. I get that, I acknowledge that, and I appreciate that, but get them ready for that. It would be my plea, I suppose. So making sure you understand that it's actually okay to have those observations done in that format that works within the placement that they're in, and that's fine. They need to be able to bring themselves to be ready to do the observations. We're analysing observation evidence in order to assess and plan holistic individual learning based on comprehensive understanding of the child's needs and interests. We're sharing observational records appropriately. So we're talking to the key person. We might not be talking to parents and carers or other professionals. That might not be within our remit as a trainee, as a student, but we're sharing what we know is important, that we share those with the people that we're working with our colleagues within that sort of the room that we're working in with the children, or the people that are working with the children. And we're describing how assessment has informed pedagogy. What you're going to do next. That's all that means. What are we going to do next in our early years setting? How are we going to adapt the EYFS, the curriculum? What experiences are we going to do? Why are we going to do that? And that really addresses that sort of in the moment planning, if you like, and intervention. If somebody's struggling with a certain thing, then you might, okay, I wonder if they can manage this. And then you would incidentally, probably without thinking at all, bring in something like a tray puzzle if a child was struggling with a floor puzzle, for example. And you build up that skill, you scaffold that skill. So that's all that's asking you. And the observation is helping you to make those informed decisions. And then you're working with others, we're working with your colleagues to think about efficient approaches to assessment and make those recommendations. So again, it's looking at that assessment cycle. But I always think 7.1 requires a lot of work in the background before you can do that if the settings are using those shorter, snappier observations, because they have refined those connections. And just be mindful of that. I was there, wasn't I? So this again, we've looked at, if you think about Learning Outcome 7, this fits in. So students are practicing those observations all the way through, using those perhaps longer methods, and then being able to say, right, I'm ready, and I'm going to now do observations the way they do them in the setting. Then you can build in lots of examples of 5.1. And this is something that's happening again, incidentally, and all, if you think of where you want to get to in 7.1 or LO7, then you're building up all of this information through the practice that you have. So use information gathered from assessment to provide ongoing effective learning experiences underpinned by a holistic understanding of the child. And a holistic understanding of the child and an understanding of holistic child development, and those connections are something I can't emphasize enough. And then there is that. So again, make sure your students are ready to do that where you can. Don't just go straight into those 10 observations if you can help it without going on that journey. And then we just have the range here that's just explaining who those other people are for key stakeholders and others, and then the formative assessment and making sure we understand that ongoing sort of assessment that we do all the time that shapes what we do. And then here there's a range of things, and some of those things you might never look at. You might never, you think, oh, what have they put that in for? But it depends what you're observing. It depends what you've been asked to look at. It depends what you're planning, and it depends then, therefore, what you're sort of going to be informed of and what you need to find out about. It's always good in those early days to have a rationale for your observation and to think, okay, I'm observing Janet because I'm concerned about this, or I'm observing Janet just holistically to see where she's at. And it might be that things come out about different areas of development that these documents could be useful for, but you may use some of them. You probably will use development matters in the YFS, for example, and you might not use any of the others. That's just a list of useful documents that you may or may not find useful depending on the nature of the observation that you're doing. And there we are. So I'll come back to you. So it's a nice straightforward unit in lots and lots of ways. If I can stop sharing, I'll come back. And I just wondered what people's thoughts are, and if anybody's got any questions or reflections if they've taught the unit themselves.
Just wave your hand, put your camera on or wave your hand or something if you want to speak, or just turn on your mic and call out. I think I'll start by saying, whilst you say it's straightforward, Janet, it's really nice to look at it again with other people, isn't it? Because I thought straightforward, what do we need to really learn about that? However, I've actually come away with 7 post-it notes. So I think that's really good. And I also think with the observation as well, like you said, when we did our training all those years ago, we did do a lot of observations and possibly too many. But I think also an advantage we had, perhaps, that some don't have today, is that we came from bigger families or had more of an extended family around. And I certainly know for myself that I found the child development stages quite a lot simpler to work out, and also how background could affect the stage and behaviour of a child, because obviously I came from a big family and we had lots of foster children. So we had what you might call your typical child, or 7 of those typical, and then we had all these others coming in. So I felt like I went in with experience as what I was looking at, whereas I think a lot of young people today come in and they've only been aware of people of their own age in their classrooms and in playtimes and things, and haven't seen the changes and development in a younger child to the extent that perhaps some of us did when we were, years ago and had bigger families, perhaps. So I found that quite interesting. Yeah, but great. I'm really, really pleased when I come away with a load of post-it notes to think about. So thank you for that.
That's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah. Ranjani?
Hi, Miss Vivek. I hope I'm audible. Hello, Miss
Yes.
Charity. Thank you so much for
Hi.
this session, Unit 8. So just wanted to add a reflection here. So a few students got signed off for this new level 3 qualification in a center where I'm working. So the 10 observations made on children. So the lovely reflections where they were able to do 10 observations and two more extra observations on the same child X and Y as a part of a reflection, because while doing the observation they felt that probably I should have used another method. If I've used narrative, probably I should have used a checklist or something else. So they found that, and then they went back to do that, and when we went for observation, they kept these 10 observations plus the two revisit that they made, and they discussed what was the next step of the child. So that next step planner was quite clear when you revisit it the second time, because learners, they themselves understand that one observation on one child is definitely not enough, even though 350 hours are only given for them during their voluntary opportunity. But still, revisiting has given them more idea about the holistic development of that particular child. The child belonged to 3 to 4 year age group. So they were able to go back to see how many development areas they could cover. So this was a reflection. So when you said that, please encourage your learner to do more than 10 observations, I really feel the need for doing more than 10 observations, because one for one child is definitely not enough. And then one more to add here is, one learner did ask me very frankly, parent consent is important because they are volunteers and they need the parent
Sure.
consent. So should I do the same child with 2 to 3 methods? I said, as a volunteer, please give more opportunities in your setting, for more, at least 10 children you will cover. So don't mind, and please request your principal or your manager if she can accommodate you to get that consent. Yeah. So if you can do that, you're at least covering 10 children. You're actually serving 10 children. Observation is supporting 10 children. That's what I told them. Don't make it like a shortcut where, just because of parent concern, I would do 4 different methods on one child and call it as 4 observations. I said that's not the right spirit. So just try. So that was also one I wanted to add here. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, and I think sharing that it will be really helpful for everybody as well. And I think just thinking about that, if you can remember, if you taught the previous version of this qualification, there used in the work-based qualification, there used to be a child study. I'm sure you'll remember that. It was a bit Marmite. You either
Yeah,
loved it
LS
or you
was there.
hated you,
Yes.
you 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 loved it or you hated it. And I think there is the opportunity, remember, to be able to make up your own little mini child study if you wanted. So if you find the child study was useful in bringing together connections from across the qualification, then you could set your own. You don't need to intensify it with the theory and things, the things that evaluated at that level, but you can look at sort of, you were saying, Ranji, about the holistic development. You could do that as part of a little mini child study and then look at individual children in different situations. It's very flexible, it's very agile, but there are opportunities, I think, to use that to enhance and to allow the student to grow in this skill. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Ms. Janet. Yeah, thank you. I'll note down on the mini study. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Vivek.
That's okay. Shanti? Do you want to put your microphone on? I've got Shanti with a hand up. If I got your name right, I hope so. No, while you're looking at that, let me just read one out. I've had an email from, some of you will know Nikki Davis from Bedford, that joins us almost all the time. She's always here, and she just wanted to share one of the things she's doing that she thought others might want to hear about. She said she couldn't make it today. However, one of the things we've started doing for this unit is to ask the learners to plan an activity based around a completed observation on one of their key children, so that it incorporates next steps and holistic learning, etc., and also provides one of the 10 observations needed, so it shows the whole planning cycle for the child. She just thought she would like to share that with you, and hopes that everyone enjoys the session generally, as usual.
I think that's lovely, isn't it? And the more you can practice that, and sometimes you need to look at that and unpick that planning cycle. So let's think about observation and let's look at those methods. Let's then think about what do we do with that information? Why is it useful? And make those connections to child development and learning. And then we're thinking about, okay, so how can we now support that child in the next step? So bringing all of that together as part of Learning Outcome 7, for example, is fantastic. And we'll certainly incorporate some of those other outcomes along the way. So it can be looked at in a very holistic, through a very holistic lens. But what the ultimate aim, I guess, of this unit is to make sure that we are really honing in and refining the skills and knowledge of child development when applied through observation for individual children, and the power of that, the power of knowing child development, that's the difference between somebody who's coming in and just sort of doing the odd session with the children, and you or your students and members of staff are professionals in child development, and that's the difference. They can make those connections. So the more practice they can have in being more skilled to do that, the better.
Thank you.
But thank you, Nikki, for sharing that. It's really useful.
It'll be on the recording that we've shared it, so that's good. Yeah. Right. Anyone else? Just stick your mic on if you want to chat, and then just call out. Got one hand up, but no response. Okay.
I feel like it's one of those units. Sorry, Blessing, come to you in a second. It feels like one of those units that is core to the qualification and core to working with babies and children and families. And so it's something that we know really well, but it's always nice to reflect, isn't it? And just remember what those skills are like when you're learning them for the first time. I think now, my age and the experience that I've had within the sector, it's easy for me to forget what I was like when I first started. And you know very little. You know what you've seen perhaps in your own families and within your own circle, which may be limited, and then you're suddenly exposed to this. So that journey from A to B, I think we just need to remind ourselves not to take that for granted, because that we're just seeing things because of that skill and that experience that somebody with less experience just will not see. So we need to just let them appreciate that journey, I think. Sorry, Blessing.
Good morning. Morning, Jenny.
Morning.
Thank you very much for this useful session. I'm just thinking about the sequencing. I'm thinking about, when to bring in Unit 8. I think it would be useful to have it a bit earlier, knowing that the learners would have to complete 10 observations and all that. So apart from Unit 2 and Unit 8 being brought forward, Unit 8 being brought forward a bit more in the sequencing, do you have a suggestion on how all the 10 units should be well sequenced in a way that will benefit the learners better?
What a question, Blessing, because they're all so important, aren't they? But I think there are some units that are kind of long and thin, if you like, and that are running through the qualification. And I think every single unit has an anchor to that. So we're always reflecting on the whole thing. But I think Unit 2, which is that holistic child development, isn't it? I think that is something that it's crucial and it's critical, and our knowledge of that needs to be practiced and refined throughout the qualification. And we rely on that knowledge sometimes when we're applying it to the other units, I think. So bringing in Unit 2, the special educational needs, which I think is Unit 3, thinking about that and factors that therefore may impact development, and how we sensitively respond through our knowledge of that child and our skills of observation and planning really come together. So I would say when you're introducing anything around development and learning, you are really opening up an opportunity to observe a child within that sort of situation or learning environment. Might not be so straightforward to observe a child with SEND, because again, it depends on accessibility, understood. But where we can look at different significant events, that could be an additional need within a child who's settling. So we can really use the power of observation to be able to reflect on what we know and how something might be impacting a child, or what are we seeing in our placement. Observations are the bridge between the theoretical and the practical, because we're able to bring forward into our discussions what we've seen. So asking our students to reflect on what's been going on in their practice, what's been going on at work or within your placement over the last few weeks, or how often you see them, and being able to use observations in that way. So I would say Unit 2 and Unit 3 definitely lend themselves to observation, but actually most of these units do allow some element of observation. So you could, in fact, use Unit 2 and Unit 8 as a kind of something that goes on all the time throughout the unit, and that's the anchor, and you're building on that knowledge and reflecting that knowledge when you're introducing all the other units. Difficult to prescribe because everybody will work in a different way, but I do think it's a very, very important unit that certainly goes with Unit 2 and certainly aspects of 3.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Oh, I've got a question here. I've still got Shanti's come off and then put a hand back up. If you're able to respond, then do. If not, stick something in the chat box, perhaps. Right. I've had a question about, is it okay to ask about the number of activities that learners have to submit through their activity plans during their observations?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking now about LO7. So let me go back. I'm just going to bring that up so that we can look specifically. Oh, seem to be presenting in a different way now, but hey ho. We like a change. Let's get to how weird.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'll just move through these slides then. I must have pressed a different button. Right, okay, so you can see it okay anyway.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's the main thing. Right, here we go. So we are here then, we're looking at analysing observation evidence in order to assess and plan holistic individual learning based on a comprehensive understanding of the child's needs and interests. So we're thinking about what we would do next. We're describing how assessment informs pedagogy, and we're working with colleagues to identify approaches. So that's giving us a clue that we should be at least making those sort of judgments and thinking about those next steps. You might start with an activity. Sometimes your observations, especially if you're doing something as a mini child study, then you might observe that child in 2 or 3 different situations, and then holistically you would think about how you would plan and what kinds of activities, or you might start with an activity and then base your observation around that. But there is something I think about, there we go. So work with others to discuss children's progress and plan the next steps in their learning. So it doesn't absolutely say for all of the 10 observations, but you will be discussing those next steps. So there needs to be evidence, at least more than one, where there's been evidence of an activity. But I think you should always, for the 10, there needs to be a suggestion of what you could do next. But in terms of full-on activities, that might be something that you start your observation with, that you've planned an activity, or that somebody has planned an activity or an experience. It might be just children, sort of playing freely in the environment, indoors or outdoors, and you're able to then observe and identify those next steps, so that it will usually start with an actual activity or experience that you're observing, and that'll come out through there. But identifying the next steps will be enough, rather than full-blown experiences or activities.
Thank you. We've got the Shanti's typed a message now. So can a
Okay.
learner start the placement hours and the Unit 8 observation at the same time so that the learner gets to do enough observations by the time the placement hours are completed?
Yes, absolutely. But what I would sort of reinforce there is that sort of you're looking for that journey, you're looking for that student or member of staff to be able to refine their judgment. So they may well do more than 10, and I would encourage them to do so, but they're practicing and they're refining and they're using maybe a range of methods before they're then able to skillfully apply the way that the experienced members of staff might use observation. So I would build up those skills, but certainly they should be observing as soon as they're ready to do so. So they would need some background knowledge, they'd need some underpinning knowledge, they'd need to know a little bit about what an observation is, why we do it, and that sincere sort of engagement with what the power of observation within an early years setting, so that they know what they're doing and what crucially why they're doing that.
I think it might be quite hard to do before they've done very much on child development as well, wouldn't it? So
Yeah,
that probably
absolutely.
need to sort of focus on that a bit more before.
Yeah. So they'd need to be ready. They'd need to know what they were doing to be able to make those connections. But then they should be practicing throughout where they can. Yes, I would agree with that.
Lovely. Ranjani.
Sorry, Ms. Vivek, my question was the learners are submitting the activity plans where the assessor goes and observe them on all the three age groups. So those plans, is there any numbers? Like, for example, I work with 2-3 institutes. So in one institute, the IQ is guiding them like you can have 11 plans all put together. And in some institutes, they say 3 plants are enough. It can be holistic. So what is your guidance, Ms. Janet? And, I want to understand on, can we have one plan for each age group where you cover indoors, outdoors, and make it more holistic? And you have also the element of literacy and numeracy I see in the spec. So that can be covered with whichever age group that is, giving the opportunity for the learner to go and, work with. So how should we go about, or is there a practice like, should we have 11 plans? Because old qualification, if you see, we had 11 plans. So what is the guidance? How do you think we can do?
Okay, so you can do that sort of individual approach where every observation will be followed by an activity plan, or you may have done something on one child and you're bringing together a holistic approach. Now, when you're thinking about sort of wider than this unit, perhaps, but you're thinking about working with different age groups and how you would apply the knowledge that you've that the student has gained from working with one particular age group, that is something that you could do through a professional discussion, perhaps, where you're thinking about, this has worked for children of this age group, and this activity would need to be adapted for children older or younger. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question properly, so do forgive me, but if you're thinking about how many activity plans do I need to submit as part of Unit 8, you would do holistic if you've been observing one child, and you could bring that learning together, and you could look individually if you've been looking at other children, but activity plans wider across the qualification for the different age ranges, then you could use and you could adapt what the students have done and the age group that they're working with to be able to support the knowledge and the skills that student has shown with one particular age group through a process of adaptation. I'm sorry, Ranjani, if I've not answered that question very well.
Yeah, it's clear to an extent for me. That is on Unit 8 is, I'm not asking about Unit 8. In general, when an assessor goes to observe a student to see what is her competency in all the 3 age groups, she gets a work product of submitting an activity plan. So that activity plan, some centers are saying the learner has to submit 10 activity plans. In that, she has indoors, outdoors for different age group. She learns how to make an activity plan for children. It's not only with Unit 8. I mean, in generic, I'm asking for this qualification. Yeah, an element of literacy and numeracy is also there because it's part of the spec. So is there any stringent number like 11 is fine, or 3 activity plans are okay. That is one for each age group, 0 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 5. And let's make it more holistic in that one activity plan template and submit as a work product. That is from the learner side, I'm asking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so if you're working with one age group, and I think it's really difficult if actually you're employed, if the student is employed as well, it's very difficult. And we appreciate that it can be difficult to work with a different age range. If that's so I think there's dependables here. So the best practice would be to absolutely work with children across different age ranges where that's possible, and therefore you would apply that knowledge and skill to the age range that you're working with, and that criteria would be embedded as such. However, we also know that that's not always possible. So if you're working with 2 to 3 year old children and you're talking about a literacy activity and you've planned for that, but actually in the criteria it's asking you to talk about that with different age ranges, then you will be able to base your professional discussion or reflections of the student will be able to on what they've done with the age group that they're working with, and talk about how they might adapt that, what they would do if they were working with younger children, if they were working with older children, and why. So you can, best practice would be to engage directly with the age range. If that's not possible, then we can look holistically and we can think about how we might adapt those plans to best suit the needs of children younger or older.
Thank you so much, Ms. Janet. Very clear. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We have another message in, and I apologise if I get these names wrong, but I'm going to just say it how it reads, which is Chinwendu has asked, in a setting where spontaneous on-the-spot planning is used, would the learner still have to prepare a planning sheet?
Okay, so it's a really good question, because I think this is one, and I think it's one that it opens up a lot of discussion, but one where I feel personally quite strongly about the fact that when that spontaneous planning, I know, is something that is really welcomed and really sort of praised. And I actually think that we do that all the time anyway. When we're working with children, we're always watching, we're always making those observations, and we're always thinking about how, what should we do next? That's happening incidentally, but it's only happening incidentally in the moment because we know child development, and we've spent that time during our training to really engage with observational skills. So I would give the students the opportunity, before they get to those 10 observations in number 7, in learning outcome 7, I'd give those students the opportunity to do those longer observational plans and to create an observation plan where they are really able to then come away from that. They might not be able to make those connections without looking at development matters or another guiding document, Birth to 5 or whatever, to be able to suggest the connections between what they've seen and child development. And those things really do come together. And so I would encourage them to do so. For learning outcome 7, they can make those little short, snappy, in the moment plans, but you've got to get them on that journey to be able to do that.
Thank you. There's another question here from Shanti as well. I hope I'm reading this right, but I would like to understand on the assessment method, which is verbal questioning in knowledge-based assignment.
Okay. So I think if you're looking at some of the knowledge, so if we go back to this, for example, and we're outlining the key stages in assessment for children, then we might set questions for students to reflect on. And I think one of the ones that perhaps lends itself better to this is where we are looking at different there was one that was looking at different types of assessment, wasn't it? Not that one. Oh yeah, I was on the right one.
Yeah, 4.1.
Yeah, this 4.1, and that might be a really nice one to where you set that as a little task and a question, because it's factual. It is what it is. Go find out about those 3 things. Write about those 3 things. That might be the evidence because they're outlining those. And then you might, for me, I'd want a discussion around them. So what does it mean? How might you be involved? What are we doing them for? So you can have a richness of discussion in the teaching and learning environment that that side of it. But you could use Q&A when you're looking at things that are quite factual, like that one.
Great, thank you. All right, has anyone else got any questions? We've had some quite nice questions today, which is
Really
interesting.
nice.
That's good. Yeah. So anything else from anyone? Just stick your hand up, jump up and down, shout out, whichever you find gets the most attention. Okay, well, we have just gone 10, so if no one's got anything burning, then we'll close. But again, just to say, you can always send in anything that you want to ask questions about, and we'll pass them on to Janet, share them with others if appropriate, and so on. So yeah, all good. I'm going to try and stop this recording. And